Hello, everybody. It is me, Sean Francis. I am back with another podcast. This is a good one. Dr. Elam. She is a master wizard at cognitive behavioral therapy, something that has helped me in the past more so than I can count. And the more I do it, the easier it is, but it can be a struggle at times. Looking at your thoughts, a hot thought they call it, and challenging it. And so we have a giant, massively wonderful conversation about this, and there's some points where she she blew my mind and goes, "Oh, thoughts come before feelings." Oh, and to recognize the difference between a thought and a feeling is a feeling is one word, and a thought is multiple words, including if you say, I feel that this person blah 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 blah. Well, that was multiple words. You just use the word feel in your thought. Mind blown. So separating your thoughts and your feelings can be extremely powerful. So it was with my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marnie Elam, PhD at Bradman University and Associate Professor of Psychology. She has a host of certifications, including Mental Health Response Specialist, Behavioral Therapist Specialist, Telemental Health Provider, and Clinical Anxiety Treatment Professional. She also wanted me to put this in there, which I should probably do at the beginning of every one. So this is just a warning that these are our opinions, and I'll just read this here. This podcast represents the opinions of Sean Francis and Dr. Marnie K. Elam. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is not intended to assess, diagnose, or treat any medical or psychological condition. If you think you need immediate assistance, please call 911 or go to your local emergency room. This podcast is for information only. It is not therapy. You should go see a therapist if you feel like you need some help. This podcast is only for informational and educational purposes and should not be considered therapy or any form of treatment. Any person who uses information from this podcast does so at their own risk, and neither Mr. Francis nor Dr. Elam shall be held liable in any way for any outcome of this use. Privacy is of the utmost important to us. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in this podcast have been changed to protect their patient confidentiality. This podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing standard of care or as a basis of expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made in this podcast. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient therapeutic relationship. Woo! As I need to mention this in all the podcasts more, but as always, if you head over to onewholelifemedia.com, there is a list of resources and links to get help if you feel like you need help or don't know where to turn from here. So head over there, check it out, and then you can also support what we're doing here. All right, with my further ado, Dr. Elam. One Whole Life with Sean Francis. When I reached out to you, one of the big goals of this project for me is trying to figure out depression. And when I sent you that first email, you essentially told me that Sean, you probably never figure out depression. And then you went on to explain to me why, but there's good news behind it. Can you kind of explain what you meant by that?
Sure. The state of the art right now is that we cannot, for each individual, pinpoint and say, that's why you're depressed. If you have a medical problem that's causing it, or a medication or a substance that you're using, we may be able to do that. And it's always extremely important to rule those things out. So if you are depressed, especially if you're depressed suddenly and there was no event or anything that happened, it's really important to go get a physical, because things like thyroid problems, brain tumors, which are not common, but they certainly occur, heart problems, other issues can cause depression. And people often don't know that. There's also a lot of medications that can cause people to be depressed. So, the list is very long of medications that would not seem related. Things like anti-nausea meds, medication for hepatitis, some heart meds and things like that, blood pressure meds. So steroids, it's really important to rule those things out, because you're just going to be spinning your wheels if you like go to therapy, and that's not your problem. If you're using, any kind of alcohol or street drugs or anything like that, those can absolutely cause you to feel depressed. Both depressant drugs will make you depressed, but so will stimulants, because stimulants sort of dump all your dopamine in your brain, and you feel really, really good momentarily, but then you crash because your brain is a recycler and it reuptakes that dopamine. There's no dopamine left. It just degrades in that sort of intense high. And then people get very depressed because the brain is depleted of dopamine. So sometimes people think, well, why am I so depressed? I'm using cocaine or crystal or whatever. It's like, well, that's why. It's just similar, bad for your brain in general.
Is it similar to like a caffeine crash in the way, like your brain's just, it's gone? I mean, it doesn't feel the same by any means.
A lot worse. Because you're really dumping, that what gives you that high is that your brain is just flooded with dopamine, and dopamine's a pleasure chemical, basically. And once that dopamine degrades, the brain can't reuptake it, so the brain has to make more. And in that intervening period, people feel very depressed.
Okay.
So it's that up-down thing, and it's part of what causes a cycle of addiction for some people is, you're chasing the high at first, and then later you're trying to run away from the depression. So it, can create this very bad cycle. So if you have a medical problem, you're using a substance, we can identify those things. But if none of that's the case, then we may not know. And you might even think to yourself, well, that happened and that must be why I'm depressed. Maybe, but we can't prove that. So all we can really do is conjecture. We could say, well, you had this happen as a child, or you just recently had this loss, or this other thing happened. But we don't know that. It's just a conjecture. So that might seem like bad news, but it's really not in that sense, because we don't actually need to know why you ended up where you are to help you get out of where you are. So depression is very treatable regardless of how you got there. So obviously, if you have a medical condition, you treat the medical condition. If it's a substance, you treat the substance disorder. But even if it isn't any of those things, if you have just a depression that kind of comes out of the blue, or even if it is related to an event, the treatment is not dependent on the cause. So That's fantastic news, right?
Right.
We've got a lot of things we can do. So we don't really have to spend a lot of time digging around in the past and figuring out every single thing that was, happened to you, or that might have been traumatic. It might be interesting. And again, it might be like, oh, okay, yeah, we think that's why, but that doesn't actually necessarily inform the treatment. So the why is not as important as how do we now help you? So, and we have a lot of ways to do that.
So that's step one. It sounds like if you go to a doctor or therapist, is just ruling out the physical things, whether, like you said, tumor or that. And then step two is just, we know you have the symptoms, and then you just start treating the symptoms at that point. Is that?
Well, you treat the person, right? You assess the symptoms to see whether somebody actually has a diagnosis of depression, and a diagnosis is a very, specific set of symptoms that people have. And then depending on that person and what their goals are, because, when you do therapy, like I don't work on people, I work with people.
Right.
So you're looking at their set of symptoms, but you're also looking at the rest of their life. So for instance, if you have depression, and in addition to that, you are homeless, and you have, a court problem, like a legal problem you have to take care of, and you are diabetic, or you've got some other thing, we have to look at the whole life picture, because those extra stressors are certainly going to have an impact on depression.
Okay.
You look at, how people have been coping with it, or maybe they're not coping with it. What kind of social support do people have? How do they feel about themselves? How long has it been going on? There's a lot of things that you assess to try to set up a treatment plan, but ultimately the treatment plan is dependent on the client's goals. So what are they trying to get to?
Okay.
And then we create a map for that, and we do some interventions. Honestly, the client has the much harder job, because I can say, all right, try this, try that. The client actually has to go out and try it.
Right.
Which is the hard part. But we do have really good treatments, and depression really is highly treatable. It's about, give or take, it's about a 90% success rate if people really engage in treatment. And even the other 10% can often get better. They just may not go into like full remission.
Okay. This is probably a good segue to that next question is, so what's the difference between clinical depression and feeling sad and just hopeless? I get a lot of questions about that, actually. People, especially now, it just seems like when social media, people are telling you, just go for a walk if you feel depressed. And for someone like me, there's no amount of exercise I could do that's going to, get me out of that.
Yeah. I mean, a walk might help, right?
Yeah,
But it's
right.
not going to solve the whole problem.
Right.
Well, I mean, sadness is a very normal human condition, right? I mean, we feel sad things happen. I lost my cat in November, my favorite cat, the best cat in the world, Serengeti.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. But I mean, I was really sad, it was really hard. I had to put him to sleep. He was very ill and I was, really sad and I was grieving his loss. But that's different than like a clinical depression, because when you're sad, or when you're grieving, it's usually sad over something and it's kind of limited to that thing. You don't feel sad about everything. You feel sad about a thing that's going on. Like, you don't like your work and you're sad about your work, but your relationship is good and you're happy when you're with your partner. With grief, let's say, you may feel very, very depressed about that loss. But again, you don't normally feel depressed about everything. You don't normally have a loss of self-esteem, which you almost always have in depression, where people just feel really bad about themselves. Even people who end up sort of having some suicidal ideation around having lost a person, it's usually about, I want to go join that person. It's not, my life is so terrible that I just can't stand the pain anymore, or I completely have no hope. Sadness, general sadness doesn't usually lead people to feel completely hopeless. They have hope. They just feel bad in the moment.
Okay.
So it's a much kind of greater general feeling of depression. Another thing that happens with clinical depression is there's almost always a loss of pleasure. There's a fancy word for it. It's called Anhedonia.
Okay.
And Anhedonia just is a Greek word. It means the inability to experience pleasure. Even if you're grieving or even if you're sad, you can kind of still enjoy that ice cream.
Yeah.
In the moment, right?
Right.
And you can still think of that person, with some joy. Like you remember happy memories. Maybe you laugh about remember when we did that and that was so funny. So there's a mixture usually of emotions in that. But with depression, that's probably one of the worst symptoms, is that things that used to feel good no longer feel good. And people just feel like nothing feels good. Like everything I used to do, it doesn't feel good anymore. And that often leads to not doing anything and social isolating. And it leads to this vicious cycle that only kind of makes that pain worse. But
Right.
so you get a lot of that. You also get a lot of physical symptoms, which you sometimes get with grief as well, but they also tend to kind of clear up within, days or weeks. Like initially when you have a loss, you may not sleep, your appetite goes down, you feel overwhelmed, but relatively quickly, unless you have a very complicated bereavement situation, you start to sleep again, your appetite comes back. You still might feel really sad, but those things start to normalize. And in clinical depression, they often don't. I mean, people just they're not sleeping, they're not eating, or they're sleeping too much or eating too much. And it doesn't get better quite often on its own. So again, grief, sadness usually will resolve over time. It might take a while, but it resolves. But depression just it stays the same. It may get worse. It really doesn't necessarily get a lot better unless you do some kind of treatment for it. I mean, it can spontaneously remit. That does happen, but it's not as common as it is for like sadness or grief, which pretty much always eventually remits and doesn't take that long. Some people are depressed for literally years.
Right.
If they don't get treatment and they don't do anything different. So those are some of the differences: that loss of self-esteem, that loss of pleasure, the sort of all-encompassing feeling of depression, not being able to experience pleasure, having a lot of physiological symptoms, and the severity usually of that feeling of sadness are some of the differences that you would see.
Is there like, I know this might go back to the reason or whatever, but is there an evolutionary reason for depression and sadness versus like clinical depression, or no idea. That's one of those. Who knows?
I mean, maybe somebody out there, there is a field called evolutionary psychology, but it's just my personal opinion about it. I think it relies far too heavily on a lot of conjecture about what would have been evolutionarily beneficial. I mean, the fact is we don't really know. We don't know really what was going on a million years ago, kind of thing.
Oh, for sure.
We know basically that what people needed to do to survive. I mean, there is some research that indicates that human beings by nature will tend to go towards a negative evaluation. And what might have been beneficial in that is, if I'm in a cave and I'm wondering if there's a tiger outside, I might want to just assume there is.
Right.
Right? Because I may not really want to go, oh no, there's no tiger, and then venture out. Right. So in that sense, perhaps, but really it's kind of a brain thing. I mean, our brains actually, our brain chemistry changes in relationship to people we care about. Like, if your best friend walked in the room right now, your blood pressure would go down, your heart rate would slow down a little bit, your brain would start pumping some dopamine, maybe some epinephrine, you would feel better.
Yeah.
So when we have losses in particular, the brain literally reacts to that. There's a really great book called, it's an old book, but it's a really good book. It's called A General Theory of Love. And it talks, about this, about sort of the brain connection and what happens when you lose someone, or, loss in general. It's not always a death, a breakup, somebody your best friend moves across the country or across the world, and you used to see him every day and now you don't. I think right now we're seeing a lot of rise in depression and anxiety because people cannot be in the same room. It's not the same to be virtual.
No, not at all.
I mean, it's helpful, but it's not, it is not the same, and we do not have the same physiological reaction to being on a video as we do to being in person.
That was actually going to be one of my next questions, is with this pandemic, there has been a skyrocket in mental health cases and depression and things like that. Is it just the lack of because we are social creatures? Is it primarily that, or I'm sure there's so many factors going on, like not knowing if you're going to have a job next week based on if things are going to get closed, and not seeing your friends and people dying around you. But what would you say is creating most of that spike right now, and what can people do to help themselves with that?
Well, some of the things you just mentioned, are very true. Financial stress on a lot of people, losses. Lots of people have been ill. Lots of people have lost loved ones, or even people who survived it but are still having symptoms, or they had sort of traumatic experiences of being put on respirators and having to be sedated for long periods of time. That's kind of traumatic psychologically too, sure. To be like, okay, you're going to knock me out literally, and I'm going to be on a breathing machine, and I might not wake up. There's the fear of that. I think one of the biggest things, and again, this is, my opinion and from what I'm seeing with my own clients and, even just my own life, uncertainty is never a good thing. Human beings do not do well when they cannot predict what's going to happen, at least marginally. We really don't like ambiguity. We like to know what we think is going to happen, because then we can plan for it. You can't really cope with what you don't know.
Right.
So it's throwing everybody's coping off. The other thing is, our stress has greatly increased with COVID because we've had to adjust a lot. It used to be, I go get on my car, get on my motorcycle, go to the grocery store, buy my groceries, come home. Now it's, okay, do I have a mask? Oh, that guy, get away from me. When they're standing like 2 feet from you in the back, like, could you back up?
Yeah.
The mindfulness of all of this is taking a tremendous amount of energy, and probably way more energy than people realize. So a lot of what used to be automated processes that took very little energy because we didn't really have to think about them, we just did them. Now we have to take all this energy to think about it. We're also socially isolated. So you add, it's kind of like you knock the domino over another domino, and they're just falling kind of one after another. I mean, you've got an uncertainty of, yes, we have vaccines now, and that's fantastic, and that's really ramping up, and the numbers are coming down, but we don't have an end date. We tolerate things better if we know there's an end date. So if we kind of went, okay, the end of pandemic will be June 1st.
Right.
Everybody would go, okay, all right, I just have to make it another X number of days or months. And it would be hard, but we would know there's an end. We don't know. We still don't know. I mean, we know it's coming, but we don't know when. So again, we can't plan. And then on top of that, so you add all this stress, financial stress, job stress, working from home. For some people, it's just a miserable experience. Some people love it, but other people hate it. People who have kids are trying to, basically school their kids and do their own work. The stress of uncertainty, the stress of all of the mindfulness that we have to do. And then on the other side, we lost a lot of our coping stuff, right? So I personally love to eat out. I don't do it a ton, but I enjoy it. Yeah. Well, couldn't eat out. I like to go to the movies. Couldn't go to the movies. I like to hang out with my friends. Couldn't hang out with my friends. So you've got this massive increased stress, and then this decreased ability to engage in the coping behaviors that you would have used before. So I am not shocked in the least that people are suffering.
Right.
Even if it's not totally to the clinical level, but just, feeling out of sorts, feeling kind of anxious, feeling uncertain, questioning their coping. And something else, just as an FYI, there was a great article in the New York Times called Why Zoom is So Terrible. And it's not that Zoom itself is terrible. It's this kind of conversation in the sense that when you're virtual, there's these little delays, there's little blips in video, and your brain is working a lot harder to process information than it would if you were in a meeting with a group of people in a room.
Huh. I didn't know.
And you're not even aware of it.
Yeah.
Because you're not even necessarily aware of the delays in video or the delay in audio, but it's kind of there. You get these little blippy things that happen. I was on a meeting this morning with my boss and kept freezing.
Yeah.
But your brain is aware of it. And so your brain is working really hard to try to figure out facial expressions that it can't quite see, and figure out that slight delay in language, and figure out that slight delay in video, and then put all that information together to make it make sense into a conversation. So it's why people feel really tired.
Huh.
With some of that at the end of a Zoom day where it's like, why am I so tired? I sat at home and I was just online. Well, that's why.
Huh. That's fascinating, actually.
Yeah.
So with that, I've read some things on how, especially with mindfulness, I know I'm jumping all over the place here, but with mindfulness, they're trying to pull you essentially out of your unconscious and more conscious to be in the moment. Am I saying that correctly? A little bit. There's maybe not.
Kind
okay.
of, yeah.
I'm pointing at the right star, maybe, but not on it.
You're in the galaxy.
Yeah.
You're good.
So with this pandemic, though, do you think long term it might be a good thing that it's pulling people out of these like routines and patterns in some way, that it's making them be more aware of what's going on? Like short term, maybe pain and discomfort, but potentially long term success? Or am I off the boat here on that one?
No, I mean, I think for some people, perhaps. I mean, some people are really enjoying working from home.
Yeah.
And that was something they didn't have the opportunity to do before. So they're really liking that part. Some people have taken up new hobbies with a vengeance, right?
Right. Yeah.
At the beginning of this, you heard all these people going, if you're not learning to play guitar, you're like failing the pandemic.
I bought a piano and tried.
There you go.
Yep. I'm
right.
one of those guys.
And by the way, let me just tell everybody, you're not failing the pandemic. If you're getting up, basically, and you at least got your sweatpants on and you're eating some decent food, you're not failing the pandemic.
Yeah.
Some people are like getting in shape. They bought a bunch, like we know that the home gym equipment business has just gone through the roof.
Right.
So people are maybe working out more, they're exercising, they're engaging in hobbies. So for some people, yeah, I think, it's not going to be a bad thing. Some people are also learning they can cope with more than they thought they could. And that's not necessarily bad. Some people's relationships, are not good because they're together all the time. But for some people, that's been a good thing. So it's very variable. I don't know, what's going to happen once things kind of go back to quote unquote normal, whether people will just shift back or whether they'll continue to engage in those new habits. I think some of the work from home will obviously stay, but some of it won't. It'll be necessary to go back. It's choice making, right? It's going to be a choice as to, well, am I going to stick with this or am I not going to stick with this now that the pandemic is over? Some of it's probably going to be the needs of the moment and the needs of the environment. Mindfulness is always a good thing if you can practice it, because in terms of coping, it will absolutely help you to cope. Because the bottom line is, it's not so much that you're trying to get out of your unconscious. What you're trying to do is get out of like the past and the future.
Right.
And just be where you are, like be in the moment that you're actually in and engage in whatever you're engaging in. Because a lot of us are doing things, the human mind automates a lot, which is awesome.
Is it like 90?
We had the, pardon?
Was it like 90 or 95% or something like that?
I don't know, but it's a lot. I mean, if
Yeah.
you think about your day and the kinds of things you do, you get up in the morning, you don't sit there and go, how do I brush my teeth?
Oh, driving freaks me out when I'm driving for 45 minutes and I'm going, did I hit anybody?
Yeah, that's called highway hypnosis.
Okay.
And yeah, where you like, I made turns and I got it and I have no idea how I got from point A to point B.
Right.
But we automate a lot, and that can be helpful, but the not so great part of it is that we're sort of not in our lives a lot. Because instead of, well, I'm brushing my teeth right now, what is that like? We're thinking about something that's going to happen or not happen, or we're worried it's going to happen like 5 years from now. And the problem with that is our mind is really powerful. So whatever we're thinking about that may or may not happen 5 years from now will feel like it's happening right now.
Right. So you essentially experience twice if you're worrying about something. I think Mark Twain said something like that.
Or you may never experience it. That's what's sad, is the things that you worry about. I mean, how many of the things that we worry about really occur?
Right. Yeah.
Not that many, but we experience the worry and we experience it as though it did happen because our minds, are super powerful that way.
Trying to avoid the saber-toothed tiger outside, like you were saying. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you are more mindful and you bring yourself into the present, it's not necessarily it's going to be pleasant, because sometimes it isn't. That's a myth about mindfulness. Is like, oh, if you're just meditating and you're focusing on the present, all will be peaceful. Not necessarily, because if the present isn't peaceful, it's not going to be peaceful. But what it helps you to do is cope in the moment. Something I think people don't really realize is the only time you ever have in your life is the exact moment you're in. That's it. You can't do anything about what just happened five minutes ago. You're not 5 minutes from now. You could think about 5 minutes from now, maybe plan, but you can't do it yet. So kind of when things are really stressful, it can really help you to just figure out, what do I need right now? Just what do I need in the moment that I'm in? And then try to give yourself that, whatever it is. Well, I need ice cream. Okay, well, can I have ice cream? I need to talk to my friend. I need to work on this project. I need to get up and move because I can tell my back aches, my leg, like you can do a little body scan. How do I feel physically? Well, my legs are kind of aching. My back, I've been sitting here for hours. Well, let me get up. Just paying attention to what the body is going through and what the body needs can take you a long way. Where am I sort of psychologically? And if you're engaged in an activity, like really be in that activity. So if you're eating, like, what does this food taste like? Not just I'm forking food into my mouth while I'm, I don't know, binge watching Netflix or something.
Right.
You tend to eat more when you do that, first of all. And you eat less when you are mindful of it, when you're really tasting your food and just sort of like enjoying that experience. So that's really, mindfulness is just about sort of being where you are and coping in the moment. And that's a lot easier than I'm going to try to go out for the next year and figure out how I'm going to cope with every single thing. You can't.
Right. Yeah. I had this time, I think it was 2 years ago. I saw a Buddhist monk on top of a mountain, and I was like, they seem like the most peaceful people I'm going to try mindfulness and meditation for a year. I'm just going to throw myself into it. And what I found early on was I was doing a lot of activities that were forcing me to be in the moment, because it a lot, just for someone who's constantly depression and worry and anxiety, it was like, if I go skydiving, if I'm not thinking about not anything but skydiving, you're gonna have a bad time, right? Or mountain bike
requires focus.
Yeah, a lot of these extreme sports, and for me, being a former professional pole vault was like that for a long time until towards the end when I could hit a takeoff, not be upside down yet, and just know exactly what was going to happen. It allowed me to think more. Yeah, it became automated, and it stopped being fun really quick because you start to enjoy that. But I got to a point what you were talking about was when I was meditating, you'd be in these moments where you just sit in this emotion that in the past I might have tried to avoid, but you would just sit there. And then what I found was eventually it would pass, if I just experienced it instead of ran from it, which was extremely powerful for me.
Yeah, acceptance, right? Which is sort of a part of a Buddhist philosophy is acceptance of what's going on and detachment. And detaching, not in the sense that we in a Western world tend to think of detachment, but detachment in the sense that you don't attach an expectation, in essence, to an experience or to a person or even to yourself, that you just experience it, whatever it is, it is.
Right.
Because attachment and expectation is what breeds disappointment. It's not that the thing itself was disappointing, it's that it did not compare to what you thought it would be.
Right.
Right. So if you have a mental image, you attach to that mental image, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to do this. It's going to be so much fun, blah, 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 blah. And then it is not that, then you are disappointed, but not because this was what it was. It just didn't match.
Yeah.
When you don't have this, you don't have the attachment. You don't have the expectation. You just walk into an experience and go, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have it, whatever it is. There isn't disappointment. Because you didn't have an expectation.
Yeah.
You still may not like it. You might go, I didn't really enjoy that. It just wasn't my thing. It wasn't fun. I didn't like it. But that's really different than, oh, I thought it was going to be this. It wasn't. I'm so disappointed.
Yeah. It reminds me of two things. I like Mark Twain once said, expectation is the death of joy. I think that was attributed to him. But I wrote that on my walls for a while, so I'd see it every day.
Yeah, and because it's true. It's true, especially because our expectations are usually way unrealistic.
Right, we have good imaginations.
We do,
but then
we put the bar up so high.
Yeah.
That the event or ourselves or other people are just never going to get over that bar.
Yeah, and then. Two, it seemed like expectations, as you were talking about, if we break mindfulness down at its basic form is just living in the moment. Expectations are in this future, right? That I'm going to get to here. So just bringing it back to the moment is key, I think.
Yeah, and even if you have a future goal, what are you doing right now to get to that goal? Because if you focus on an outcome, you're never going to get it. That's the irony.
Right.
If you want to be an astronaut, you can sit there and go, I want to be an astronaut. I really want to be an astronaut. I really want to be an astronaut. I want to be an astronaut. Okay. You want to be an astronaut. Awesome. What are you doing about it?
Yeah.
And and what could I do right now to work towards becoming an astronaut? And there's a I think it's a Japanese expression that says the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, the secret is it doesn't begin with a single step. It's all single steps.
Yeah, exactly. I have
the entire 1,000 miles.
I had a friend who was thinking about that. He's like, well, let's say it's 100 steps. If we use this step analogy, and if you only focus on 100, you just miss 99% of life, essentially.
And you'll never get there. That's the problem. You will never get to that space because you don't take those 99 steps. So it's not about that you don't plan or that you don't think about the future at all. That's not the point of mindfulness. But it's where can you act? And where are you feeling and where are you being? You're being in this moment. This is the only moment you ever have to be. This is the only moment you ever have to affect change.
Right.
And when you focus more small that way, things become a lot more doable because you can break it down to, well, what if I really wanted to be an astronaut? What could I do today? Maybe it's Google how to be an astronaut.
Right.
No.
Step one.
Right. Find out what kind of degree do I need to have? What kind of, what are the physical fitness requirements? What are these kinds of things? And then you start from there and you start going, okay, well, I have to have a degree in astrophysics. All right. Well, how would I get a degree in astrophysics? And you break it down into these very small pieces that are then doable. And anything, I'm a big person of metaphors and expressions.
Yeah, me too.
The ones that I make up, my students call them Elamisms. But I use a lot of other people's too. So there's an old kind of joke about how to eat an elephant. One bite at a time.
Yeah.
And life is like a giant elephant. You do it a bite at a time. And I actually think I discovered a little trick I'll teach you and your listeners because it really works. When I was getting my doctorate, I had to do a dissertation. And a dissertation is this huge research project. You've got to write this big page. It's like a book. It took 3 years and it's like 130 pages or something. I don't know. I hated every second of it. Just not my thing. I really didn't enjoy it. I don't like research. It was not my thing. And I kept procrastinating, and I'm not generally a procrastinator, but I kind of started to realize that I would say, you know what? On Saturday, I'm going to spend 5 hours working on my dissertation or something. I'm not going to spend 5 hours working on my dissertation. I hate it. So Saturday would come around and I would find every reason not to even do it, right? Because part of procrastination is you build a goal that's too big that you're not going to achieve, and nobody likes to fail. So you just don't do it. If you don't start, you can't fail.
Yeah.
So what I started doing was, and I realized this I call it the mind trick because you're sort of tricking yourself, is I started saying, I am going to write a half a page, or I'm going to read one journal article, or I'm going to work for 10 minutes. So I figured it was either a task or a time limit. And what I realized is if you set a goal that feels absolutely doable, it's got to feel doable. It should not be challenging. This idea that you should set these challenging goals, no. Very few people can really do that. Elite athletes, some other people can really set these big challenging goals and really focus, but the average person out there, no.
Right.
So I started doing that. And it was great because, let me ask you a question. If you're an exercise guy, it sounds like, but let's say you didn't exercise and you were going to start going to the gym and you made a goal that you were going to walk on a treadmill for 20 minutes and you walked on the treadmill for 10 minutes. How are you going to feel?
Oh, like I failed.
Right. Because you did.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You set a goal. You had 20 minutes. You failed. You did half.
Right.
Right. So is that going to motivate you to want to go back to the gym again tomorrow?
Oh, no.
No, because you failed. And that sucks.
Probably fail again.
Okay. But let's say that you set a goal that you're going to walk for 5 minutes on the treadmill and you walk for 10 minutes on the treadmill. How do you feel?
Oh, I succeeded.
It's the same 10 minutes.
Right. That's awesome. That's a great way of looking at that.
Yeah. The idea is how you feel about what you accomplish has nothing to do with what you accomplish. It has to do with what you said you were going to accomplish.
Huh. I like that a lot, actually. Yeah, I do that same thing. I set it too high. Like a couple years ago, I wrote a pole vault book, and same kind of thing. Like I put it off for 2 years because I was like, I don't know how to write a book. I've written a thesis, which is like a 30, 40, 50 page paper,
similar.
But similar. But now I'm more telling stories instead of boring research that the general population doesn't want to read. And what kind of shifted in my head was two things. Was I'm just going to write a chapter a week. So I was like, and I got it done in 3 months because I just did a chapter a week. Yep. So I got my 12 chapters done, and it was chewable. At that point. And then
it has to feel doable. And this is a great trick when people are depressed.
Okay.
I teach my depressed clients this because when you're depressed, you don't have a lot of energy. You don't feel like you can do much, but your house is like, it's starting to get bad, right? You got dishes in the sink, you got laundry piling up. And the more it piles up, the more you feel like just staying in bed and doing nothing because it feels overwhelming. And so the last thing you want to do is set a very challenging goal. I'm going to do all the laundry. No, you're not.
Right.
And what is the hardest part about any project?
Just starting.
Getting started.
Yeah.
But the reason getting started is so hard is because if you set a bar that's too high, why would I start? I can't finish. Like you said, I failed. So
Right.
I don't want to fail. So I'm just going to roll over and go back to sleep. So whatever the goal is, it has to feel absolutely doable. So it literally can be, I'm going to wash one dish. Because guess what? If you wash a dish, that's one dish that's clean, that wasn't clean before.
Right.
And once you get started, the likelihood is you will do more.
That's the hardest part for someone with depression, I would imagine. Or I don't have to imagine because I've been there. But it's even washing a dish sometimes feels like the hardest thing in the entire world.
It is, but if you still feel like you could do it, it might be hard, but hard is not impossible.
Right.
Right. And that's an important thing to get. If you're depressed and you're feeling it's not impossible. I can do it. Will I do it is the question. But it's a heck of a lot easier to contemplate washing one dish than washing all the dishes in the sink.
For sure. Yeah.
And if you washed one dish, you succeeded.
Yeah.
And now you succeeded. Success begets success. Success is rewarding. You feel better because you succeeded and you got something done. So more or less motivating to get up tomorrow and wash another dish.
Gotcha.
More motivating, right? Because I had success. I did it. And if you'd washed two dishes, you doubled.
Yeah. I like that. Like when I'm coaching, I wrote on every single page of that book, slow progressions are the best progressions, right? As an idea that similar to what we're talking about, but if you do too much too quick, you burn out. Like I see that we were talking about exercise earlier. People go to the gym, and no one follows a resolution more than a couple days or a week. It just that's not how it works. But when you think about it in depression, it's almost like just getting out of bed might be that first step, and dishes might be step 5 down the road.
Well, it can be. I mean, you could set a goal. If that's the case, you could set a time goal. So it may be, I'm going to get up for 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm just going to get up, and walk around or something for 5 minutes. Or I'm going to go outside for 5 minutes because sunlight's good for depression. But it turns it kind of on its head what most people think of as goal setting, because we're always being told, every motivational poster in the world, reach higher, set goals. But it really does make people feel like a failure when they can't reach that goal. And a lot of times you aren't going to initially.
Right.
And that's why you have to pay attention to how you feel when you're setting the goal. If it doesn't feel doable, it's not a good goal. It literally should not be challenging.
Right.
It should be something you absolutely feel you can accomplish. And that's why you set them very small. And that's how I got my whole, dissertation done.
Yeah.
And sometimes I did only write a half a page, but at least I got a half page more than I had the day before.
Yeah.
But usually and it made me want to approach it again though, the next day, because it felt good. Instead of, I said I was going to do this and I didn't get that done. And now I feel depressed and it's bad. That sort of punishing thing is not motivating. No. Reward is motivating.
Right.
And success is rewarding.
This is a reward for me because I've had this idea for a couple of years too. I seem to almost have to, it's like a 2-year plan in my head. I have to get up the courage to do it. And it took weeks and weeks and weeks just to shoot you the first email to have this conversation, but that was all I did that day because it was like, well, if it's a no, yeah. But that's why we're here today is because I just sent an email and we're here, it's which is cool. I'd love to keep talking about goals, but I had a couple other questions about cognitive behavioral therapy if we can get there.
Sure.
For me, cognitive behavioral therapy has been awesome, especially mixed with mindfulness. And you told me last time we talked that mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy are essentially the same cloth in a way, that they're intertwined. Can you just explain how it works and how it alleviates depression and anxiety, or helps it alleviate depression and anxiety?
Well, the basic principle behind cognitive therapy in particular is that it's not so much what happens to us that makes us have an emotional reaction. It's what we think about what happens to us. So thoughts are mediators.
Okay.
And you can kind of see this out in the world. So let's say you are on the freeway and the traffic stops. Like there's something ahead, you can't see what it is, but the traffic comes to a stop. And you look to your left and there's like a guy in a suit and an expensive car, and you can tell he's like really ticked off, and he's yelling and he's honking his horn and, waving his hand like, get out of my way, what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe there's somebody, to the right of you who's got their radio turned up and they're like, bopping along to the music. And maybe you're somewhere in the middle, like you're kind of frustrated, but you're also just going, well, it is what it is. I guess I'll put on a podcast and, listen to my buddy Sean talk about depression because it's awesome.
Right.
The three of you are all having the same event, right? The event is exactly the same. So why are you reacting differently? Because you're thinking about it differently.
Right.
Guy over here is thinking, everyone should get out of my way. I'm going to be late. I have this important meeting. Why is this happening? Blah, blah, blah. Guy over here or girl over here is going, well, stuck in traffic. Nothing I can do. Just going to listen to my tunes. Okay, dude. And you might be again somewhere in the middle, like, well, this kind of sucks. But there's, what am I going to do? I know I'll be productive. I'll listen, to my podcast. So your reaction is mediated between the event and the emotion is, what are you thinking about the event? And people who get depressed or get anxious tend to have either depressive thoughts or anxious thoughts. And it leads them to have these sort of negative emotional states. And then unfortunately, what we think about things also leads us to engage in behaviors. So if you have somebody that, let's say, has always wanted to take a dance class, or they would love to learn to dance, I always want to take a dance class. But an anxious person is going to be thinking, people are going to look at me and I'm not going to be a good dancer, and people are going to laugh and they're going to, make fun of me. And I don't want that to happen. That would be bad. So I'm not going to go take a dance class. And that's a cognitive distortion, which lots of people do. And a cognitive distortion is essentially a way of thinking that doesn't match reality. And we all do it to some extent. And we all have sort of our favorite cognitive distortions. That particular one is fortune telling. And it also has some catastrophizing. So fortune telling is I read the future. If you ask people, do you believe in psychics and stuff? Most people would say no. And yet we fortune tell constantly. Right.
A lot of mind reading going on. Yeah.
Yeah. We mind read, we fortune tell, we catastrophize. I know what will happen, which is mind reading, and it will be terrible. That's catastrophizing.
Yeah. There's a list of these, right? Like they're called automatic negative thoughts, like ants.
Absolutely. You can Google them, cognitive distortions. There's a whole list of them. And again, people kind of have their favorites, the ones they sort of do all the time. Catastrophizing is very popular. Mind reading, fortune telling, all or nothing thinking, sort of black and white thinking is very popular. And then we just assume, though, the interesting thing about it, and this is sort of a human nature thing, is because we're not really logical by nature, we assume that if we think it must be true. Thoughts are not truth.
Right.
Feelings are not truth. Truth is truth. And we have no way of knowing what would happen. What if you went to the dance class and you were the best dancer there, and then you started competing and you started winning all this prize money and you became famous and you ended up on Dancing with the Stars, or something like that.
Right.
Who knows? The fact is we have no idea, and you have no way of knowing what will happen unless you go do it. But what's super sad to me about, especially like anxiety around that, is it's not just a thought and a feeling, it's a behavior. That therefore I never go take a dance class because I assume this negative outcome. Also with anxiety, what you get from a sort of thinking standpoint, anxiety at its very basis, and this is very simplified, so it's more complicated, but a very simple basis. Anxiety generally is an overestimation of threat. So I think that whatever I'm imagining is going to happen is highly threatening in some way, either physically, emotionally, psychologically, relationally. It's very threatening. So I overestimate how threatening it actually is. And then it's an underestimation of coping. And those two things
Fascinating.
together cause anxiety. If you didn't overestimate the threat, even if you weren't sure about your coping, you would have less anxiety, and vice versa. Even if the threat seemed really high, but you totally believed you could cope with it, you would have less anxiety.
Wow, I've never heard it put that way before. That's incredible.
I'm just that good, Sean. No.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking to you.
That's the Beck model. If you read Aaron Beck's work, he's the founder of cognitive therapy. That's basically his model. But if you think about it, and if you have anxiety, you can kind of see it.
Yeah.
You can see how you think of something and you just feel like it's going to be terrible, And one of the ways to kind of counteract that I teach people a lot, and I use myself, is I have what's called a scale of terribleness. And for me, 100 on the scale of terribleness would be that all my limbs have popped off and I'm spreading blood everywhere.
It's pretty terrible.
That would be pretty terrible.
Right.
So anything less than that is probably not that terrible.
Okay.
And most things are, we are pretty fortunate to live in a country where we're not dodging bullets every day. There aren't death squads on the streets. We're not in a war zone. We have our problems, and some of them can be pretty bad, but our everyday lives are generally kind of down here on the scale of a terribleness, not up here. So most of the things that we go through, they're not truly terrible. They're inconvenient. They're unpleasant. They're, not fun. They're annoying. They're frustrating. But when you tell yourself something is terrible, again, because our thoughts lead to our emotional reactions, well, your mind goes, terrible. Oh my God, let me run around and have an anxious response.
It's reactive though, right? So it's hard to control. So is this where you really, I say mindful, but I don't know if I'm saying it loosely or not, but you really have to just have this awareness of the event and kind of almost categorize these things into thoughts. This is how I'm feeling and this is how I'm thinking. But that also takes a lot of, for me, it took a lot of emotional energy in the same way that COVID's doing that to a lot of people too.
It takes mental energy, but I'll tell you, it takes less mental energy once you learn to do it than being reactive does.
Gotcha.
Because think of the emotional energy that being emotionally reactive takes.
Yeah.
It's a lot to get yourself very anxious, right?
Yeah.
Or to have a depressive reaction where there's similar kind of thoughts, but the thoughts are generally more personal, like I would suck and I would be terrible and it would be awful. And it's not so much related to other, anxiety often is related to how other people react to, they'll laugh at me, they'll think I'm terrible. This is more how we're going to feel about ourselves quite often with depression. But the cool thing with cognitive behavior, the linchpin of it, is that recognizing just because I think something doesn't make it true. So how do I know what is true? And the way that you figure out what's true is by evaluating the thoughts. So you don't assume that because you think it, that's what's going to happen. So you evaluate for validity, which would mean, is this thought true or not? Right. And utility. And utility is, even if this thought is true, is there any utility in thinking it? Like dwelling on it. And that might be a thought from the past. Let's say something happened, 30 years ago, and you keep thinking about, well, but that happened. Okay, it did happen. And you're right.
Kids stole my candy bar in 4th grade. Right.
Yeah. And it was bad, and they should not have done that. And it was, there's nothing about that was good. But how is it helping you in the moment, in your life, in your relationships, in your work, in your emotions, to dwell on that? So that thought might have validity, but it doesn't have utility. Okay. And then there's techniques to, like thought stopping and some other things to help you not dwell on those things. The validity part is harder because people often don't, first of all, they don't distinguish thoughts from feelings. They quite often say, well, I felt that was not fair. Well, that's not a feeling, that's a thought.
Right.
Say that wasn't fair is a thought. And so you challenge thoughts, you never challenge feelings, because feelings are just feelings. And they don't have validity or not, they just are. They just exist. But you could challenge a thought that wasn't fair. And so you would look at, well, what's your evidence that whatever it was that happened wasn't fair? Define fairness. What's your evidence that it wasn't? What's your evidence that it was fair? And evidence has to actually be like factual stuff. It can't be other thoughts. It can't be feelings. Now, you can think something very strongly or feel something very strongly. It can still be completely false. For a lot of time, everybody on the planet thought that the Earth was the center of the universe, basically, and the planets went around the Earth, and everybody thought the Earth was flat. I mean, they very much strongly believed that, and it didn't matter how strongly they believed it was still wrong. So the strength of one's, belief or feel has nothing to do with the validity or veracity of your thought. Facts are facts. So you have to kind of evaluate, well, what was this thing? So if you're, to go back to my dance class thing, well, I just know I'll be a terrible dancer. Well, what's your evidence that you'd be a terrible dancer? Well, right. When I was in high school, I didn't dance well, or somebody told me I wasn't a good dancer. So one person telling you that you're not a good dancer, does that actually prove that you're not, or is that just that person's opinion?
Right. That's where looking into the past has helped me out some, where you go,
sure.
I look into the past, this event happened and created some pattern or thought or reaction. I don't know what to call it. I'm not the expert, but some pattern I fall into that creates this new thoughts or emotions or something. And if I can go back and go, oh yeah, it was that moment, it's easier for me to challenge that thought than
right.
if I'm just in the moment and going, why do I think this? Where did this come from? Kind of a situation.
Yeah. Well, it can help sometimes, and CBT is pretty present focused, but it's not that you never talk about the past or why you might think what you think. Although again, just like with determining why you're depressed, we may not know why you think what you think. Sometimes there's no way to determine that. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you can pinpoint it and go, I remember exactly, my mother said this or whatever, and I started to think X, Y, Z. And the reason that can help you is because it actually reinforces the idea that thoughts are not truth.
Awesome.
They're not universal truths, right? They're just somebody said it.
Yeah.
But somebody saying something doesn't make it a fact. Go ahead.
No, it's difficult. I know when I was in the hospital it's really hard, and I don't know what part of me this is. Maybe it's the athlete in me or something that made me the kind of athlete, but they gave us a binder of things to learn, and I was having a rough day, so I read the whole entire binder and went right to the thought record pages, and I was like, I'm going to figure this out because this looks like it has something that's going to help me. And I filled the whole thing out without telling you the situation because that would take too long, but I filled it out. That said, circle your hot thoughts. I'm like, it's this one, it's this one, it's this one, and I still felt crappy. I went in the next day and told the story in front of everybody, gave it to the therapist that day, and I'm like, this is stupid. This doesn't work. CBT is garbage. And I filled it out the way I'm supposed to, and I threw it down. And she just looked at me and goes, you circled your hot thought and wrote it down 5 times in red.
Yeah.
that's it right there. But I couldn't see it. I literally wrote it, circled it multiple times, and it took a therapist to point out what was right in front of my face the whole time. And
and I highly recommend that if you are depressed, if you have if you're really diagnosed with anxiety, or you think you have anxiety, you have depression, it's so much better to go to therapy. And it doesn't mean that you're crazy or, that you couldn't kind of figure out some things on your own. But this stuff is new to most people. It requires a certain skill. These are skills that you learn. And it's kind of the same thing. You can teach yourself piano, but it's a heck of a lot easier to learn piano with a piano teacher.
I'm not good at piano. I can pluck the keys. That's about it. But
But I mean, that's because, but if you had somebody to show you.
No, exactly. And that's where the therapy it became kind of fun because I've read a lot of books, and I'm not, it's like reading a guitar book or, like you said, a piano book. You can read it, but you don't get the intricacies of it or how to download the information in your brain and your body.
Well, you don't have feedback. You don't have feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's part of the problem. In life, we need feedback. We need correction. Right. You're a pole vaulter. You've had coaching.
Right.
Right. And you do coach.
Yep.
How instrumental to your success was that coaching?
Oh, tenfold. Yeah.
Right.
I couldn't do it.
And the best athletes in the world still have coaches.
Right. Yeah. They attribute all of them. Like I've never heard like an elite athlete in any space take all the credits. I was like, oh, I got to thank my coaches and my team behind me.
They do, but it's interesting that even at that level, they still need feedback.
Right.
They still need somebody observing what they're doing and saying, you know what, when you're hitting that ball, you're slicing too much to the left. That's why it's not going, that's why it's ending up in the devil's alley. Like, you need the feedback. It's really hard to learn with no feedback.
Right.
It really is. And learning these cognitive techniques, which are very powerful if done correctly, and very frustrating if not. Like you'll have your experience of like, what this is crap and it doesn't mean
garbage.
Anything. Yeah. But when you learn it and it also can become automated. I don't just teach this stuff to my clients. I do this every day in my own life. I have a tendency to get depressed myself at times. So I have to like watch my own thinking. I have to be careful I'm not fortune telling. I use the mind trick all the time, these tiny little goals. And it actually now becomes almost like a game. You can turn it into a game. Like if I get ready to go somewhere, but I have like 5 minutes or 10 minutes before I actually have to leave, I will like set the timer and go, what can I get done in 5 minutes?
That's
and
awesome.
I like run around the house. It's like, oh, I cleaned the toilet in that bathroom. I wash those dishes. Like, it's amazing how much you can get done in a pretty short amount of time and feel very accomplished. Like, it feels really good. And then you don't have to do it later instead of, I only have 5 minutes, so I can't do anything.
That's it. I found that too, is these tools were given to me for depression and anxiety. But when I started using them, with my athletes too, and their performances increased like tenfold. And then they were telling me they were using them in school, and I was using them in school and work and things like that. And I wish there was a way to introduce these sooner, and maybe there is to people, but for me, I had to go to a mental health hospital to even know these existed.
Yeah.
Is there resources out? Or I know you said you recommended a handful of books. There's tons of them, but do you have favorite ones?
There's a ton of stuff out there. There's you can go on the Beck Institute website and there's a lot of stuff. I mean, just Google cognitive behavioral stuff. There's all kinds of workbooks. But again, I think it's really hard to just do it on your own. I think you could get some of it, but if you don't have that feedback, and part of the reason I know this is through working with clients who, like, I'll teach them how to use a thought log and they still mess it up because it's hard. Like, they get it eventually, but they're, in the evidence columns, they're putting in thoughts. Thoughts are not evidence.
Right.
Other thoughts are not evidence for other thoughts, kind of thing. And I see it in my students when I'm teaching my students to do this. I have them do some like sample thought logs where they actually have to do it on a situation. And, even my students who they're in graduate school, they're learning all this stuff. We've been talking about it for weeks about cognitive work. They still quite often don't get it right.
Yeah.
And I have to, I provide the feedback to go, well, here's why. I know when I was learning it, I was like, I'm very confused, what is this? And I really got to learn, even just evaluating again, the difference between a thought and a feeling, that just even starting there, people mix those up all the time.
I still wrestle with that. Yeah.
Yeah. It can be difficult.
Do you know, this is kind of out of left field, but where would you put like intuition into would you consider that like a thought or a feeling? Or is that something completely different?
Thought.
A thought? Intuition's a thought?
Yeah, because intuition is essentially a belief.
Okay.
Right? I believe this about that.
Yeah.
That's a thought. One of the ways to distinguish, and this is kind of a simplified thing, but feelings are one word. Sad, mad, happy, frustrated, annoyed. Those are feelings. If it's a sentence, and it's not, I feel annoyed, then that's a thought.
Gotcha. I wish someone told me that a long time ago.
Well, I try to keep it simple because I know this stuff is complex, but I mean, I really, if I were the queen of the universe who must be obeyed, I would be teaching this to children in school. I mean, it would be like a subject in school because what it actually is based on is critical thinking and logic.
Right.
It's really about logically evaluating, is what I'm thinking matching reality as much as I can know reality. And if I can't know reality, because like I haven't done it yet, like again, if I come back to my dance class thing, you don't know whether you would be any good. That's the bottom line. That's the only realistic thought. I have no idea whether I would be good at this or not. You don't know.
I feel like that would work with kids because to me, they seem like natural scientists in itself, where they're always experimenting and playing anyways.
Well, and if you get in before they learn a bunch of distortions, habitual distortions, and you can teach them sort of this logical basis. And the other thing I think that's really important from a mindfulness and just from a cognitive standpoint is stop caring so much.
Easier said than done.
Well, it is, but not really, because it depends on what your goal is. If you set a goal, if you're going to go to the dance class and your goal is, I want to be the best dancer in class, well, that's a lot of pressure.
Right.
And you really could fail at that. You may not be the best dancer in class. And the fact is, you may be the worst dancer. We don't know. But how about your goal is not to go be the best dancer? How about your goal is just to go have fun? Or your goal is to go meet some nice people, or your goal is to just learn some dance steps, whether you're good at them or not. You cannot fail at those goals.
I say that when I have pole vaulters for the first time, because I see guys jumping 19 feet or girls jumping 16 feet. And I go, if you just land in the pit and don't die, you're an official pole vaulter and you win.
Yeah, if you get up and over, right? If you
don't
even get up on the pole, you're doing good.
Yeah, I don't even want them to go over a bar. If they just land and don't die, that's
right.
My step one.
You didn't break your neck. That's success.
You're alive. You get to do it again.
But does that make sense? There's an old expression about mind over matter, and the expression is, if you don't mind, it doesn't matter.
Right.
and that's true. If you went to the dance class and you sucked at it, so what? So what? Doesn't mean anything. It only means something if you make it mean something. And that is where your control is. Just don't make it mean something.
Yeah. I did this book. There's a book called How to Train a Wild Elephant. I don't know if you've heard of it, but the idea is your brain's the wild elephant, and you know, the more you try and control the mind, the crazier your elephant's going to get. So, but it was 50 weeks of a mindfulness challenge. So like week 1 was you would put a string on your left finger to remind you to try and do everything with your left hand that week. And so it kind of just took you out of the future and the past and brought you into the moment. And then
it's out of automation too. That pulls you out of automation.
Yeah, exactly. And I loved it. And then at the end of the week, you flip to the next page and it tells you something to think about. That were you frustrated that week? And that week I was super frustrated. Like I couldn't edit anything. Try editing on a So I went hardcore on it, where it's like, just try brushing your teeth, you know? And I was like, I'm going to try and flip my computer the other way and edit a whole video with my left. That didn't last too long. It would have taken a year. Yeah, I tried. But the idea was, on that last page, they go, well, that's your beginner's mind. Would you yell at a kid for falling off a bike for trying to learn it the first time? And then,
exactly.
Yeah, from that moment, it allowed me to go, oh, I'm a beginner at this, and I'm treating myself like an expert before I had that kind of message, and that helped me out a lot.
Well, and that goes right back towards the beginning of our conversation about expectation,
right?
And setting a bar. That if you don't set a bar, then whatever happens is okay.
Right.
So you go to the dance class, and you just go. And again, you make your goal can even just be to find out what it's like to go to a dance class. And that's it.
It's perfect.
And you're not going to fail at that. And that's not threatening. And because, it's not an easy skill to control our thoughts. And sometimes we can't, sometimes we do get a little overwhelmed, or there's an event that's just so big that it overwhelms, and anybody would just be reactive to it. But we can learn how to sort of direct our thinking. We can learn to evaluate our thinking. We can learn to shift our thinking from, stuff that's just hurting us and putting us down and making us not be involved in our own lives, to things that help us and motivate us and move us towards behavior. And that's kind of the behavioral part of cognitive behavioral. Is when I work with depressed people, I tell them there's 3 gets that you need to try to do: get up, get out, and get moving. get out of your bed,
Yeah.
get outside on some level and get moving, do something. Because the depressed mind will tell you, oh, I'm just going to lay here and I'll feel better. Do you ever feel better when you just lay there?
No, never.
No.
But it took me a long time to learn that, and
right. Same thing with isolating. Don't go do anything. Don't talk to anybody. You'll feel better. Do you ever feel better when you're completely isolated?
Yeah, I fall into the other trap is if I go out into a group of people, I'm going to bring them down. And then that's just another trap that is in my own head I'm very aware of it now. But in the past,
it's another thought. And what's your evidence, right? What's your evidence that are they telling you, geez, Sean, you're just a downer. Get away from us.
Yeah, this is a slippery trap, where you go there, you have it, and then I'm not having fun because I'm depressed.
Right.
So then I assume everyone else, and there's an automatic negative thought that just popped in, and it's really fast. And that's what I find is sometimes it's
automatic.
Like it's an avalanche. And that's been the hardest part is if I can catch it early enough, or if I'm doing these things when I'm not depressed, which is probably the best advice I could give anybody is that you don't do this stuff when you're in the fire. You practice it when you're out of the fire. And then now I can almost like there's a fire alarm going off when a thought comes up. I can go, oh, wait, I need to pay attention to that. Or, hey, I have this really powerful feeling. Is that accurate to the,
what was I thinking when I had that feeling?
Yeah.
Because again, we never challenge feelings because feelings, you just have them. But you can look back and go, what was I just thinking before I had that feeling?
So the thought precedes the feeling always. Is that how that works? Okay.
Yeah, because let's say right now, if I said to you, all right, Sean, I want you to think about the best thing that ever happened to you in your life.
Yeah.
And you really started to dwell on that, how would you feel?
Pretty good. Best thing.
Pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And if I said, all right, then I want you to switch and I want you to think about the worst thing that ever happened to you. I want you to really dwell on that. Then how would you feel?
Yeah, horrible.
Okay, but did anything actually happen?
No, not at all.
You just thought.
Yeah.
You just thought. You thought about something great, and then you thought about something terrible, and then you felt.
What? Okay, I don't want to keep you too much longer because I could go down a rabbit hole.
Good, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine.
What's that? If you go into a room and just have like a weird vibe of the energy is just kind of strange, would that be a thought?
You actually may be picking up on other people's tension. Like you can observe body language and you can see, right?
Yeah.
When somebody's unhappy with somebody else. Like, have you ever been in a restaurant and you look out the window and you see like a couple and their body language is, you don't hear what they're saying, but they're having an argument.
Yep.
Or they're not happy. I mean, about 80% of communication has nothing to do with the words.
Right.
So you can absolutely read people's body language. And so you walk into a room, you can kind of feel that because your mind is decoding that information. It's seeing the, sorry.
Oh, no worries.
It's seeing the body language, right, of those people and the tension that they're holding in their body. We do feel that.
So would that be a situation where like the feeling would come before a thought?
It's probably not either. It's more of a noticing, it's an attention, It's an attention thing. And there would be thoughts too, like I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Making me uncomfortable. And something, the brain reacts, the amygdala is very much involved in emotional response. And so the brain can be reacting to, attending to a feel in an environment or something like that. But generally speaking, most of our emotional reactions, if you really do stop, you can go back and go, oh, I started thinking about X.
Okay.
Or I was thinking this. And even in a tense room, it might be, your thought might just be, I want to get out of here. I don't like this.
I got to go.
Yeah. And then you're uncomfortable and, maybe a little scared or those kinds of things. But usually feelings are the consequence of a thought or a behavior. But that's the good news, because if you can work on your thinking and you can work on your behaving, then you get the emotion. And we often reverse that. We say, well, I have to feel it to do it. No, you don't. I have to feel confident before I can go out and do something. No. Why would you be confident?
Right.
In fact, if you thought to yourself, oh, I'm very confident about this, that probably wouldn't be valid.
Right.
Because if you've never done it, again, with the dance class, oh, I'm very confident I'm going to go be a great dancer. You could suck at it.
Yeah. Expectations again, right?
Right. But you go and you find out, and it, you become confident by doing. And that's why doing is so important. It's why getting out, behaving, doing things, finding out how something feels is so important. Because if you don't do that, you never know. And then you are like a mouse in a wheel in your own brain, right? You're just running. Eventually you get so tired, you fall off the wheel and you're right where you started. Used up all that energy and you got nowhere. So you kind of want to think almost like you're a detective. A detective doesn't sit at their desk and go, I think that guy killed him. Okay. I'm just going to I'm going to like charge him because I think he killed him because he looks funny. You got to go out and gather evidence.
Right.
You may have a hypothesis, like I probably honestly would be a bad dancer because I'm not, when I go dancing, not a great dancer.
It's a thought.
I could make a hypothesis, but maybe I would go, and if I had feedback and a teacher, I could become a good dancer. Either way, I wouldn't care.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing, again, is to come back to, if you go and you engage in behaviors without the outcome or the assumption of failure or success, like you just don't go with that valence, that it's more of an experiment. I'm going to go find out what this is. Just like you taste a food. There's no success in tasting a food. You don't go, I like it, that's success.
Right.
No, you just taste it to find out if you like it. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, okay. But that's not a success or a failure. It's just an experiment and you found out. You gathered information. So you could go to the dance class, see how you do, you find out. Whether I'm pretty good at it or not, I like it, I don't like it. These are great people. I would come just for the people. I met somebody and that's great. I became friends with them, whatever. But if you don't ever engage in any behavior, there's no opportunity for reinforcement. If you just sit there, you're never going to get reinforced because there's no opportunity for it. Yeah. So going out and being active also provides that opportunity for reinforcement. When you go out and you pole vault and you do well, you feel reinforced. But even if you don't do well, you went out and did it, and it still might feel good physically just to do it, to be out in the sunshine, to know that you can do something other people can't do. I would never pole vault in a million years. Right? So even if you go out not with the intention of I'm going to get over a certain bar, but you just go out with the intention of just enjoying yourself, you can't really fail.
No. I like one question you brought up there is you were talking about just not caring. Like where's the line with that? Is it self-deprecating thoughts somewhere around there? Because there's a point where or maybe you don't. Maybe you really just don't care what other people think, and as long as you're enjoying yourself, right? You just go. Yeah.
Well, the thing is to own your own power. You have power whether you think you do or not. That's not you have power because you exist. You change the world because you're here. The only choice you have is whether you change it for kind of better or worse. So you can give other people as much power as you'd like to, or as little as you would like to, by and large. I mean, yes, some people have more power than bosses, whatever. But why do you care what the guy on the street thinks? Like, or is that person's thought, if that guy walks by you and he looks at you funny, or are his thoughts going to like leap out of his head and, rip your head off, or what? Somebody else's thoughts only have the power you give them.
Yeah, it's strange. I wrestle with that a lot, just being like a guy who runs things online, right? So you have an audience, and I have to be conscious of what the audience wants, but at the same time, I don't want to care what they think at all. I want to follow my own thoughts and my own experiment with. I want to know what I'm into, but at the same time, if I do that, there's a hard balance there for me, especially online, where people tell me they want this, but I'm into this. But if I don't care what they want, then the business kind of fails.
Unless you find a different audience that also likes what you like.
And that's why I'm here,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you see a lot of entertainers like that, right? They do stuff that some people hate. Look at Lady Gaga. When Lady Gaga was first coming up, I mean, the meat dress and all that. Honestly, I didn't like her. I was like, oh my God, this is just nuts.
Yeah.
And then I really started just listening to her sing, listening to her music. And the girl's got pipes.
Yeah.
She really does. She's very, I used to be a singer. She's got talent. She really does. And you get kind of past that. And once she got well known, she's very smart, because once she got well known, notice she dropped most of that.
Right.
That was just to get the audience. But she also, got publicity by being very outrageous.
Right.
So there's an audience for everything. It's just finding that, that particular audience. And I'm not saying don't care at all ever about what other people think, because I think that's a bad message. You hear that sometimes, right. Don't care about anything. You know what? I think you should care about the feelings and the thoughts of people who care about you. So, because again, we need feedback, right? So if you're out there and you're just being a total jerk in the world, and somebody you care about, who knows you well, and they love you and they have good intentions, and they come to you and they go, dude, you're being a jerk. And I'm telling you that because, you're really alienating people, and you're about to lose your job, and and I don't want to see that happen to you. That's why I'm telling you this. That you should pay attention to that. You should care about that person's thought, because that feedback from somebody who cares about you and has your interest at heart is very valuable. What I'm saying is the random person on the street, who doesn't like the way you dress. I normally have blue in my hair. My hair is usually about half blue.
That's awesome.
I just don't right now, because I just got it cut. I'm going to get it done on Thursday. The blue is going back in.
Yeah.
And I have women come up to me on the street and go, oh my God, I love your hair. And I just, I wish I had the courage to do that. I'm like, it doesn't take any courage. Just do it. Yeah, and people will compliment you like you just complimented me. And if you don't like it, dye over it. That's the thing. You can always dye your hair darker and it'll cover the blue. It doesn't matter if you don't like it. But, you start to actually find out that people appreciate a little bit of individuality and being your own person and saying your own truth and the things you like. I'm a huge nerdy geek and I don't care. Right. And yet I get this thing, my not that long ago, but when I was a little bit younger, I had a group of students that actually made this little bracelet for me that called me the Queen of Cool. Oh my God, it's not cool, but that's because I came so far around the other direction, right? Yeah. I'm so far nerdy and so far geeky that they found that to be cool because I wasn't trying to be anything else.
You were authentic. Yeah. There seems to be that seems to be the key in like being authentic versus if you're trying to be something you're not, then that's probably some sort of a thought thing you're future, whatever else again.
It is, and you're not going to succeed at it. I mean, that's the other thing. You can succeed in being yourself, but it's pretty hard to succeed in not being yourself.
Right. So just embrace it.
You can try, but why? Why do it? And the thought behind it too is that the assumption is they're thinking badly about you. How do you know? Maybe they're looking at you going, wow, love that hair color, love that jacket, love that thing, whatever it is. You don't know what other people are thinking. It's really kind of none of your business.
Yeah. Is the answer important? Like if you were to ask somebody? No. Not
unless you care about the answer.
Right. I
really, if somebody walked up to me and said, I hate your hair, honestly, I don't care. So what?
Yeah.
Why would that matter to me? Because I might look at somebody's hair and not like their hair. Why would that matter to them?
Does this go back to the validity kind of part you were talking to? Like, does
Utility,
this information, does this information help me in my present moment? And if it doesn't, it's just wasted information. Just get rid of it.
Well, and it's just somebody's opinion.
Right.
So I have my opinion. Somebody else has their opinion. Who cares? I mean, it's just an opinion. Opinions don't have any weight in the world unless they are, a judicial opinion or an opinion about your work. Again, people you should care about, again, your whole family comes to you and tells you you're being a jerk. That opinion matters because now it's affecting your relationships. It's having an impact in your life. But if the guy on the street, thinks you dress funny or something, well, maybe you think he dresses funny. Should he care about what you think?
Right. I only asked because when I first started learning this, I had somebody come up and I had one of the therapists go, well, you can always ask and then you'll get your answer if you
You
don't
can.
know. And
well, but you're probably not going to ask random people on the street, right?
no, but I did because I'm kind of a nerd too. Or we might be nerds in the same way or different ways. Who knows?
It's okay.
There's a lot of
Nerds
types of nerds.
unite.
Exactly. I like data, so I was like, I wonder what they're thinking. And then if they told me what they were thinking, and if they, let's say I had blue hair too or something, and they were like, I really hate your blue hair. And then I'd ask why, kind of like a child in a way. Well, why do you hate my blue hair? And if they didn't have an answer, then I was like, oh, well, that information is not important, and I'd be out of there. But it took a lot of work too, like it was a lot of questions that I didn't need to do either, where it seems like now if I was to do this again, I would just go, well, no matter what the answer is, it's not going to affect me in this moment. So I'm out of here.
Yeah. I mean, if the information is important to know, then yes, and an example might be you are at work and you walk down the hall and your good buddy walks by you and doesn't say hello. You're going to make an assumption about why that happened based on you, not based on him. So you're going to, depending on who you are, you're going to think, oh my God, maybe he's mad at me. Why didn't he say hi to me? Or you might think, wow, what a jerk. He couldn't even say hello to me. What's up with that? Or you might think, oh gosh, I hope he's okay. He didn't even seem to notice me. And again, all those thoughts though have nothing to do with him. It's the person having the thought.
Right.
And if it's really important to you to know, then go ask him. Hey, dude, saw you earlier. Why didn't you say hello? Are you okay? What's going on? And it could be something that you never would have even thought of. He had his earbuds in and was thinking about a problem and just literally did not see you.
That's why asking questions was so helpful for me, because I had all these assumptions, and every time I'd ask people, it was more often than not none of the thoughts in my head. So then instead of correct. So instead of even trying to guess, I would just, again, like a child, hey, why? And I'd get my answer.
And that's evidence. That's how you gather evidence, right? Yep. So if you were to do a thought log and you're looking at that evidence, that's evidence. If you don't have any evidence, go find it. Right. If you're trying to figure out if your thought is valid or not, and you really don't have any evidence for the thought or against the thought, you could try to find evidence.
Yeah.
But again, that's how you go do an experiment though too. Like I know I'd be a terrible dancer. Well, how could you find out if you're going to be you could go take a dance class and see if you're a terrible dancer.
Yeah. So you can have the hypothesis, but it's not the facts until you do
you're not running the experiment to prove, the hypothesis or whether it's null or not. So that's the active part, that's the behavior. Get out there and do some things. And just acting helps us feel better from the standpoint of control, because we tend to feel out of control when we're not being active. And active for depression, there's two kinds of activities that tend to help. One is mastery, and that would be the activity of something that requires some skill, that you know how to do or that you're learning how to do. Master activities and pleasure activities, things that you either still enjoy or used to enjoy, with the hope that pleasure kind of comes back as you do it, or some or both, right? You might have a mastery activity that you really enjoy. And engaging in those things on a regular basis. But I just know from my experience, my own experience working with clients, is that as long as it's not destructive, doing something is going to be better than doing nothing, like 99% of the time.
So,
go ahead.
You can go. That's okay.
And the other thing is, it never matters what you're not doing. Right? So when people say, I'm not going to use drugs, I'm not going to do this other, whatever it is. So what? It doesn't matter what you're not, you know what? I'm not skydiving right now. Who cares?
We're not doing a lot of things right now.
There's like a billion things that we are not doing in the moment, and none of those things matter. So it's always about, what are you going to do? And if you're depressed, especially, you can actually just make a list and pick one, because it can be hard to think, right? It can be hard to think of something to do when you're depressed. And then that just becomes tiring. Like, I can't think of anything, so I'm just not going to do anything. Again, but if you had like a list of, basic things, then you could actually branch them out from super simple things. Like, I'm just going to get up and walk down the hall a couple times, to something more complex. Like, I'm going to take a drive somewhere and go visit my friend or do some other thing. And just pick one and do it, because it makes you feel more in control. And a body in motion tends to stay in motion. I mean, we kind of follow that law of physics a little bit, and a body at rest tends to stay at rest. And just not listening to sort of that depressed mind that just says, oh, you'll feel better if you do nothing. You'll feel better if you isolate. You won't. And you can prove it to yourself because you don't. If that actually worked, then you shouldn't be depressed anymore.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
If it worked to do all those things, to just stay in your house and eat a bunch of carbs and isolate yourself, then you should be really happy.
Yeah.
But you're not. You're still depressed and maybe more depressed. So clearly those behaviors do not lead where your sort of depressed mind is telling you they're going to lead. The depressed mind's a liar, honestly.
It's so strange. It's insane. And this is where I always kind of get tangled up into this, where cognitive behavioral therapy has helped where when do you trust that mind and when is it lying to you? Because some things that go, hey, this is going to make you feel really good might be terrible for you in that moment. But on the other side, stay in bed. This is going to make you feel really good too, but it feels absolutely terrible.
But that's where you can look at your evidence, right? And
exactly.
You can go back and look at every single time I've told myself that staying in bed would make me feel better, did it?
Right.
Right? And probably 99% of the time it did not.
Right.
It didn't make you feel better. So there's no evidence for that thought. Right.
So it's almost like you need an evidence log, essentially, right? Yeah. Hey, I did this experiment.
The thought log has the evidence column, evidence for, evidence against, and then a more realistic thought. The whole idea of evaluating your thinking is not just to prove a thought wrong. It's to find a thought that fits evidence.
Okay.
That's your evidence.
I think you just tied it all together for me. So
yes. So evidence for the thought, evidence against the thought.
Yep. And
then you look at all that evidence. So maybe, like again, with my dance class example, maybe your evidence for the thought that I would be a terrible dancer is you were in a dance contest when you were 15 and you lost.
Right.
Okay. So that's some evidence. And maybe evidence against that thought is you had to do this dance for a wedding and you had a couple little lessons and everybody complimented you on what a great dancer you were and everyone wanted to dance with you. So that would be evidence against that thought. So you have some evidence for, some evidence against. So a more realistic thought might be, I used to not be a very good dancer. I'm a better dancer now. I don't know if I could become better, but I could try.
That makes so much more sense. You're essentially just making your thoughts match reality.
Exactly.
If at its simplest form, I was just trying to tie it all together simply.
Exactly.
Like
that is exactly what you're doing. And then the added benefit to that is the more my thoughts match reality, the better problem solver I am.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Right. Because
you're not trying to slay dragons or
right. But I mean,
exist.
If reality is over here and my thoughts are over here, then all of my problem solving efforts are over here and they're doing nothing for the problem, which is over here.
Right.
Because materially, I'm not doing anything to solve this because I'm solving the problem in my head, not the one that actually exists.
Right.
So for instance, if your buddy that walked down the hall, you think he's a jerk. He didn't say hi to me. Fine. If that's the way he's going to be. And then you act on that thought and now you don't talk to him. And that was not at all why he didn't say hi to you. He really just didn't see you. He was deep in thought on something else. And there was nothing personal. But now you're not talking to him. And you're acting all angry. So now he assumes, well, what the hell's wrong with him? Why is he acting that way? Geez, I didn't do anything. Why is he acting like, well, fine, if you want to be that way.
Right.
But you can play this game. So now he's not talking to you. Now your relationship is ruined over, wait for it, something that never actually happened.
Right.
So you problem solved, but with your thought of he's a jerk, I'm going to get him back, whatever. That was your problem solving. It wasn't in reality, though. It had nothing to do with what was actually going on because you didn't have evidence and you didn't go get evidence to find out how should I problem solve this.
That makes so much sense now. I think I've had a lot of the pieces. It's for me, it gets strange, and this is this might be just a little dark, but it's like, how do you trust the thing that's trying to kill you? That's what it feels like sometimes when you have depression. So
well, you don't.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where I think this kind of tied in was I would have the evidence column, and then I would have the, things that don't make it real. But it's like, yeah, these two columns have to match the reality and the evidence. And then the other stuff's almost like the fat you cut off of your meat in a way.
And sometimes you do have evidence for both. You do have a little evidence for something, a little evidence against something.
Yeah.
So, but then the meeting in the middle is not the black and white, which it would have been if you were only on one side of that.
Right.
And then again, you can cope with it better, and you tend to feel better. And it's not necessarily going to eliminate all the negative feelings. So, but let's say, you rate your feelings before you do that, right?
Yep.
Let's say you were at a 10 on being sad and a 10 on being anxious and all of that. And you do this process and your thought becomes, less dichotomous and less black and white and more realistic. Well, maybe you're still sad, but it comes down to a 5.
Right.
Maybe you're still a little worried, but that comes down to a 2. I mean, that's still worth doing because some is better than none.
Yeah.
And that's another like really important thing for people to understand is life is not ever going to be that you're just going to be happy every second, or you're going to be logical every second. We're trying to get better, not perfect.
Right.
And some better is better than no better.
Right. I like that.
Right?
Should be on a shirt. I like that.
Well, some is better than none. And another little saying that I would say is that nothing changes if nothing changes.
Yeah. Well, I have this written on my computer.
You're not going to get anything different if you don't do something different.
Yeah. Like right here, I'm looking at it right now. It says, don't let perfectionism get in the way of good enough.
Oh yeah. I'm often saying this in meetings at work. Let's not make perfection the enemy of good.
Yeah. Yeah. This would be my absolute last question for you. And cause I'm going to have to digest this and watch this a few times. What would be one thing you would suggest to people maybe listening that they could do to start like right now? Maybe it doesn't have to be cognitive behavioral therapy or something like that. Or would you suggest like bringing awareness to just what's going on in your head, or, something to read? Like, what would you suggest?
Well, I honestly would say if you really think that you have clinical depression or you have clinical anxiety, get help. There's just no reason not to. I mean, it's so helpful, and you can stumble around on your own and you're probably going to get somewhat better, but it's just way easier when you do have that feedback and when you have that support and you have an assessment of what's going on and somebody that is professional and has a lot of knowledge and can help pinpoint for you and with you, like where you are, where you want to be, and how do you get from here to here in a personalized way. Because therapy is not cookie cutter. If you've never gone to therapy before, don't think you're going to go and that it's just going to be like, oh, here, we're going to, slap this manual and you're going to do this thing and everybody does the same thing. That's not the way it works. It's personalized to you and what you want and what your goals are. And if you go see a therapist and it isn't, then go see someone else because they're not doing their job right. But that, and it doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean you've got to wade through every bad thing that ever happened to you in your past. You don't. You're the director there. And the goal is to get you there. And I can tell you, if you do it with a therapist, if you do cognitive behavioral work, I mean, I have seen people who were really depressed for long periods of time, within just a month or two, really starting to feel better. And not only are they feeling better, but their life is getting better because their problem solving is more logical. And the behaviors that you're engaging in are more related to actually solving the problem, as opposed to, again, kind of what your depressed mind is telling you of, we'll just stay in bed, we'll isolate, beat yourself over the head with a 2x4, metaphorically every day about how horrible you are. All of those things that kind of come up, or with anxiety of, just worrying and being fearful of everything. The therapy can really help. I mean, there are a ton of workbooks. You can go on Amazon and there's lots of workbooks for cognitive behavioral therapy, and that you can kind of do on yourself. But again, without the feedback, you kind of don't know if you're really doing it correctly. And then you just might get frustrated and not be happy. You could go and just do a couple sessions even just to kind of get some, like you don't have to be in therapy forever kind of thing. You can go and say, all right, I want to do like 5-10 sessions and just teach me how to do this, and then kind of try to go off and do it on your own.
And those could be for people without depression or anxiety too, right? Like,
oh yeah,
it seems like there's this message we get that you should only go to a therapist if you're at the worst of the worst, you need help, you're,
oh no, I see a lot of people. Yeah, I see a lot of people that we have a euphemism, the worried well. And they're people that they don't have any kind of disorder or anything, but maybe they're just going through something, they're going through a divorce, or they're having a work problem, or some other kind of family issue, or they want to work on sort of a self-esteem issue, or even like some of what we've just been talking about, a reactivity issue. Like they just recognize I'm just constantly reacting to things, and I want to be more proactive than reactive.
Yeah.
And all of these skills can absolutely be helpful just in life in general, because they center you and they focus you more in what's actually going on, in your life, not just in your head. And then that again helps you problem solve better. And the more you problem solve better, just the better your life is, because things aren't getting away from you then.
Right.
You're not getting overwhelmed. Problems are not just getting bigger. You're feeling more in control. Better things are happening for you. Hopefully you become more sort of resilient in the face of disappointment or failure, or, because again, if you just don't make a big deal out of it for yourself, it's not a big deal. The meaning making is in ourselves. It's not out in the world. The world does not make meaning of whether, you're a good dancer or not. You do. And so therefore you can decide not to make meaning out of it and just go have fun. And, whatever that is. You can stop setting, bars that are too high. You can stop setting goals that you keep failing at, and instead use the mind trick and do some very small goals and actually start, feeling successful, which will make you want to do more. So, there's a lot of small things you certainly can do on your own. Yeah. But I think if you actually have a clinical depression or a clinical anxiety, it's just a lot harder, and it's probably going to take you longer to do it. If it's just life stuff, I think you could do a lot of that on your own. But it's just like if you have another medical problem, if you've got heart disease, you can go out and exercise and you can change your diet, but you still need the medical professionals to tell you whether it's working, right? You need the feedback.
Yeah, I never understood how people could go get a physical checkup, but they don't get mental health checkups. And I feel like that trend might be changing a little bit, but it's going to take a while still.
It's just, it's the stigma stuff. But again, don't stigmatize yourself.
Right.
And I do think it's getting better too. I mean, I don't see nearly the stigma now in people accessing mental health and going to therapy as I did when I started my career 30 years ago, when people were a lot more like, I don't want anyone to know I'm in therapy. I mean, now a lot of my clients, like, they tell everybody they're in therapy and they share the things they learn. And, it's like almost like a group thing out there.
Yeah, that's how I felt. Like, the amount of relief I felt after some of these things just kind of, I call them knots, like a knot came out of my head. It was like, oh my gosh, why would I not want to share this with people?
Yeah, I untangled something and I learned something, and I, maybe this would help my friend, or maybe this, would be this other thing. I think it's just it's kind of an effective and efficiency kind of thing. You can try it on your own, and I don't discourage people, necessarily from doing that, especially if you aren't very, if you don't really have a disorder. But it's just a lot harder. And especially if you have any suicidal thoughts, your functioning is failing, like you aren't able to get up and go to work. You're not able to take care of your children. I mean, that is more, now you're coming into a crisis, and you're not going to be able to just probably get out of that on your own. Because that's kind of the definition of a crisis, is I've run out of my own resources.
Gotcha.
If I had resources, I'd be able to do those things. But I'm so down, I'm so tired, I'm so wiped out or whatever, that I literally don't have the resources anymore to think straight, to have the energy to problem solve. And so I just kind of quit, and you get into that sort of hopeless, helpless thing. And so if you're feeling that way, you really need to seek assistance. Especially if you have any kind of current suicidal sort of ideation in the moment. I mean, if you think you might do that, you really need to call your doctor, call 911, go to the emergency room. These problems can be fixed. They don't feel like it in the moment, But I can't tell you the number of clients that I've had who contemplated suicide or even tried it at some point and were so happy they did not succeed.
Right.
Because it's not forever. It feels like it, but we really do have good treatments.
Yeah.
For anxiety, for depression, for PTSD, we've got good treatments out there. And if you engage in them, the likelihood is, your quality of life is really going to improve.
Yeah.
And you're, an example of that, right? Because you've done that.
Yeah. And you're pretty much taking the words out of my mouth. When I've been suicidal, it's been like, I don't know where else to go. I just want the pain to end. I didn't really want to kill myself,
right.
But it was
you don't really want to be dead. You just don't want to live like you're living.
Exactly. And so having other resources, which provided that hope that just, hey, I don't have to do this route over here. That's permanent. Let's try this,
right. And you don't have to do it alone.
Exactly. And that helps too, for a long time I used to think I had to, and it's so much easier not walking this road alone.
We are social beings. We need each other, and there's
people care about you.
Yeah, there's no reason to we don't function well. If you think about the worst punishment you could do to somebody short of like the death penalty, what is it? Solitary confinement.
Yeah. Which is what it feels like in depression.
You can do. Yeah, because it is to completely isolate someone. So when you do it to yourself, it's just making you suffer more. It's not helping. It's not necessary. And that's the thing that people used to do as the worst punishment. Communities, if you go back, a couple hundred years, if you committed some kind of crime in that community, they would shun you. Right? And shunning was basically no one has anything to do with you. And that was considered about the worst thing you could do to somebody short of killing them.
And it's crazy that we do that to ourselves. It blows my mind.
It causes more pain. There's no shame in being, when people come in, they say to me, oh, I feel I feel ashamed or whatever. I kind of stick my hand out and go, I'd like to welcome you to the human race. Because everybody needs other people. This is not even, it's kind of like saying, I'm ashamed that I need to eat food.
Right.
Or drink water. It's the same thing. It's a need. It's an innate need. It's not anything that there isn't a person on the planet that doesn't have it. So, talking yourself a little bit out of that shame. It is similar though. It's like you need food, you need water, you need connection.
Yeah. I think that just tied it all together. We started talking about the pandemic and needing connection with people, whether you're in a mental health crisis or not. It's always about connecting with people and knowing what's going on. And I want to thank you for connecting with me right now. This has been extremely eye opening. I thought I had a little bit of a handle on cognitive behavioral therapy, and I need to go back and reread some of those books and challenge some of my thinking I have on it right now. So I want to thank you for that. I've
probably been doing it longer than you've been alive, so it's okay.
but yeah, it's I needed someone to check me on it, and I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're very, very welcome, and thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation, and I hope that it's helpful.
Whew, that was a good one. I use a lot of these things in this podcast today. The thought one, man, that gets me. The difference between a thought and a feeling, mind blown. Thanks everyone for watching. If you have somebody you suggest or that you think would be a good guest, let me know, either in an email or just get a hold of me. That would be great. If you do need help, remember there are a list of mental health resources over at onewholelifemedia.com that will help you out and get you the help you need. And if you want to support this channel, always onewholelifemedia.com will help you in a million ways to do that. Give this a share if you think it could help somebody. And remember, life's meant to be experienced, and curiosity will get you there. I will see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.